Nobody knew why the millionaire's deaf son kept crying, until the janitor's little daughter used sign language. The little girl's hands moved through the air like birds in flight, graceful and purposeful, while the boy's tears finally stopped. "Mommy says everyone has a voice," Maya whispered, her small fingers dancing in patterns that made the crying boy suddenly go still. "Sometimes we just gotta learn how to listen differently." The ballroom fell silent. 200 wedding guests, champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips, designer dresses rustling as bodies turned. The string quartet's violins faded to nothing. All eyes fixed on an impossible scene. A janitor's daughter in a too small donated dress, kneeling before a millionaire's son, speaking without words. Robert Chandler pushed through the crowd, his $5,000 suit suddenly feeling like a prison. For 3 hours, his 4-year-old son Ethan had been inconsolable. 3 hours of screaming, thrashing, tears that wouldn't stop no matter what anyone did. The family pediatrician, flown in from Manhattan, had checked him twice. The child psychologist on retainer had tried every technique. His wife Catherine had cycled through frustration, embarrassment, and finally, the kind of cold fury that made staff members disappear. "Where is that cleaning woman?" Catherine had hissed 20 minutes earlier, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Get her to control her child. This is humiliating." But now nobody was thinking about humiliation. "What is she doing?" Robert heard someone whisper behind him. "Is that sign language?" Another voice answered, wonder bleeding through confusion. Maya's hands continued their silent conversation, each gesture deliberate, patient. Ethan's face, red and swollen from hours of crying, transformed before everyone's eyes. His small hands lifted, shaking at first, then mirroring Maya's movements. Clumsy, desperate, but unmistakable. He was signing back. "Oh my God," Catherine breathed beside Robert, her champagne glass slipping from her fingers, crystal shattering on marble. Nobody noticed. Is he actually? Robert couldn't breathe. They'd spent $40,000 on specialists in the past year. Speech therapists who came with credentials from Johns Hopkins. Developmental experts who'd written books. Audiologists who confirmed what they already knew. Ethan was deaf, but his cochlear implants were functioning perfectly. He should be progressing. He should be communicating. He should be thriving. Instead, he'd been getting worse. More withdrawn, more frustrated, more angry at a world he couldn't get to understand him, and a family that couldn't understand what he desperately needed to say. And now this child, this little girl in worn shoes with patches on her dress, was doing what none of them, with all their money and expertise, could do. Maya turned, looking up at the crowd of silk and diamonds with eyes too wise for her 4 years. "He's been trying to tell you something," she said, her voice clear in the silence. "Something real important." But nobody was listening the right way. Robert knelt down, his knees hitting the floor his family's money had paid for. His heart hammered against his ribs. "What?" His voice cracked. "What is he saying?" Maya looked at Ethan, a question in her eyes. The boy nodded, his hands moving again. Faster now, more urgent. Maya watched, her small face growing serious, then concerned, then scared. When she looked back at Robert, something in her expression made his blood run cold. He's saying he saw something. Something bad happened. And he's scared, 'cause nobody believes him. She paused, glancing at the crowd, then back to Robert. "He says he saw it 3 days ago. He's been trying to tell you ever since. But when you can't hear and nobody listens with their eyes," her voice dropped to almost a whisper, "you're just scared and alone and nobody knows why you're crying." The ballroom seemed to tilt. 3 days ago. 3 days of Ethan's unexplained terror. 3 days of them assuming it was another tantrum, another phase, another problem money could eventually solve. What did he see? Catherine's voice cut through, sharp with something that might have been fear. Maya's hands moved again, asking Ethan something. His response made her small body go rigid. He says, Maya swallowed hard. He saw someone get hurt. Real bad. And the person who did it. She looked up at the crowd of wealthy, powerful people surrounding them. Is in this room. Welcome back to another incredibly heartwarming story, my dear family and friends. Before we proceed, could you please hit that subscribe button so we can continue bringing you these great stories? Thank you. To understand how Maya Williams came to be in that ballroom, kneeling before a millionaire's son, unraveling a mystery that had consumed an entire family, you have to go back. Back to before the wedding, before the crying, before everything changed. You have to go back to the beginning, to a woman the world had trained itself not to see. Shanice Williams woke every morning at 4:17 a.m. Not 4:15, not 4:30, exactly 4:17, 3 minutes before her alarm, because her body had learned that those 3 minutes of silence, those 3 minutes before the chaos began, were hers alone. 3 minutes to remember who she was before the world told her who she had to be. She would lie there in the darkness of their one-bedroom apartment in South Memphis, listening to Maya's soft breathing from the pull-out couch in the living room, and she would let herself imagine, just for 3 minutes, a different life, a different world, a version of herself that hadn't made mistakes, that hadn't trusted the wrong man, that hadn't ended up here, 32 years old with a 4-year-old daughter and a resume that consisted entirely of jobs nobody else wanted. Then the alarm would sound, and Shanice Williams, the dreamer, would disappear. In her place would rise Shanice Williams, the survivor. By 4:45, she had showered in a bathroom where the tiles were cracked but scrubbed spotless. By 5 o'clock, she had laid out Maya's clothes for the day, prepared her breakfast, packed her lunch. By 5:15, she had walked 3 blocks to Miss Henderson's apartment, carrying a sleeping Maya, paying $20 she couldn't afford for childcare that started before the sun rose. You work too hard, baby, Miss Henderson said every morning, the same words, like a prayer or a condemnation. Work is all I got, Shanice would reply, the same response like an amen. By 5:45, she was on the first bus of the morning, watching Memphis wake up through dirty windows. The city looked different at this hour, softer somehow, like it hadn't yet remembered all the ways it could be cruel. She knew this route by heart. 23 minutes to the medical complex where she cleaned offices from 6:30 to 11 o'clock. 47 minutes from there to the corporate building downtown where she cleaned from 12 to 4 o'clock. 31 minutes from there to the event venue, the Grand Magnolia, where she cleaned from 5 o'clock until whenever the job was done. 3 jobs, 17 hours a day, 6 days a week, 51 weeks a year, because you couldn't afford a vacation when you were 1 missed paycheck away from eviction. The other cleaners talked while they worked, shared their lives, their complaints, their hopes. Shanice stayed quiet. She'd learned early that friendship was a luxury. Friendship meant coffee breaks you couldn't afford to take. Friendship meant getting drawn into drama that would cost you focus. Friendship meant people knowing your business, and knowing your business meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant danger. So she cleaned in silence, invisible by choice as much as by circumstance. She was good at it, being invisible. It was a skill she'd perfected over years. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't be memorable. Don't be a problem. Don't be anything except the work itself, the clean floors and empty trash cans and spotless mirrors. Just be the ghost that makes the mess disappear. But here's what nobody knew about Shanice Williams, what nobody saw because they weren't looking. She noticed everything. She noticed which executives left medication bottles in their desk drawers, which marriages were failing based on the progression of arguments overheard, which companies were struggling based on the documents left carelessly on desks. She noticed patterns, details, the small truths that people with power never thought the cleaning woman would understand. And she noticed what people threw away. It was a Tuesday in March, 6 months before the wedding, when Shanice found the book. She was cleaning the fourth floor of the medical complex, the pediatric specialist's offices, emptying trash cans with the same methodical precision she brought to everything. The bin outside Dr. Morrison's office was full, someone clearly cleaning out old stock. Medical pamphlets about childhood diseases, outdated prescription pads, and there, wedged between papers destined for the shredder, a book. American Sign Language, a beginner's guide. The cover was bent, coffee-stained, clearly unwanted, clearly trash. Shanice pulled it out, weighing it in her hands. It was thick, substantial, filled with illustrations of hands forming shapes, forming words, forming an entire language she'd never considered. She almost threw it back. What did she need with sign language? When would she ever use it? But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way the morning light hit the pages. Maybe it was the memory of her grandmother saying, "Knowledge is the only thing nobody can take from you, baby girl." Maybe it was just the fact that it was free, and when you lived like Shanice lived, you didn't turn down anything free that might someday somehow be useful. She slipped it into her cleaning cart under the trash bags. That night, after Maya was asleep, Shanice opened the book. She expected to skim a few pages, then put it away, another forgotten object in a life full of them. But something happened as she looked at those illustrations. Those hands, frozen on paper, speaking without sound. Those gestures that carried meaning across a silence that words couldn't bridge. She kept reading. The next night, she read more. The night after that, she started practicing the basic signs. Hello. Thank you. Please. Her hands felt clumsy at first, uncertain, like they were learning to speak a language her voice had never known. But she kept practicing. By the end of the first week, Maya had noticed. "Mommy, why are your hands doing that?" "Learning something new, baby. Come here. Let me show you." She didn't know why she taught Maya. Maybe because the girl was always there, watching, absorbing everything with those wide eyes that missed nothing. Maybe because teaching someone else forced her to learn it better herself. Maybe because in a life that felt like drowning, learning something, anything, felt like air. Or maybe, though Shanice would never have believed it then, maybe it was because somewhere in the universe, a plan was unfolding that required a janitor and her daughter to speak a language that nobody expected them to know. They practiced together, in the mornings while eating breakfast, on the bus making it a game, at night before bed, Maya's small hands copying Shanice's larger ones, both of them speaking in silence, both of them learning that communication was bigger than sound, deeper than words. "Why are we learning this, Mommy?" Maya asked one night 2 months into their practice. Shanice thought about it, her hands pausing mid-sign. "Because, baby, there's people in this world who talk differently than us. And just because they talk differently doesn't mean what they got to say isn't important. Learning their language means we can hear them when nobody else can." Maya nodded solemnly, the way 4-year-olds do when they sense something matters even if they don't fully understand why. "We are learning to listen with our eyes," Maya said. "That's right, baby. We are learning to listen with our eyes." Neither of them knew that in 6 months, this throwaway book and these nighttime practice sessions would place them at the center of something much bigger than themselves. Neither of them knew that learning to listen with their eyes would mean seeing what everyone else had missed. Neither of them knew that the invisible woman and her daughter were about to become the most important people in a millionaire's world. But that Tuesday in March, in a fourth-floor office that smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. When Shanice Williams pulled a stained book from a trash can, the universe quietly shifted. A door opened, path formed, and everything that would happen next became possible. Robert Chandler's life looked perfect from the outside. That was the problem. The penthouse apartment in downtown Memphis overlooking the Mississippi River. The vacation home in Destin. The private school for Ethan that cost more per year than most people made. The Tesla in the garage next to Catherine's Range Rover. The investments, the portfolio, the generational wealth that meant his great-grandchildren would never worry about money. From the outside, Robert Chandler had everything. From the inside, he was drowning. He'd made his money in commercial real estate development, the same way his father had, and his father before him. The Chandler name meant something in Memphis. It meant power. It meant influence. It meant that when Robert walked into a room, people paid attention, not because of who he was, but because of what he represented. Old money, new opportunities, the kind of man who could make or break careers with a phone call. He'd met Catherine at a fundraiser 7 years ago. She was beautiful in that carefully constructed way that wealthy women mastered. Every hair in place, every word calculated. Her family had money too, different money, tech money from her father's software company. Their marriage had been logical, strategic, the kind of union that made sense on paper and in photographs. They'd wanted children. Of course they'd wanted children. That's what people like them did. They built legacies. They created heirs. They ensured the family name continued. Ethan had been born on a Tuesday in October, 6 weeks early but healthy. Perfect, the doctor said. 10 fingers, 10 toes. Strong heartbeat. Good lungs. They could tell from how loud he cried. A perfect Chandler baby to carry forward a perfect Chandler life. The first year was normal. Ethan hit his milestones. He smiled at 2 months. He rolled over at 4 months. He sat up at 6 months. Catherine documented everything, posting carefully curated photos on social media, each one showing the perfect mother with the perfect child in their perfect home. But around 13 months, something shifted. Ethan stopped responding to his name, stopped turning when Catherine called him, stopped reacting to loud noises. He'd be playing with his expensive developmental toys, the ones recommended by experts, and Catherine would call him for lunch, and he wouldn't even look up. "He's just focused," Robert had said. "He's concentrating. That's a good thing. It means he's intelligent." But Catherine knew. Mothers always know. The diagnosis came at 18 months. Profound hearing loss, bilateral, genetic. The audiologist's words washed over Robert like cold water. Cochlear implants were recommended. Early intervention was crucial. With proper support, children could thrive, could live full lives, could communicate effectively. Robert heard the words. He understood the words. But what he felt was failure. His perfect life had produced an imperfect child. His perfect genes had carried an imperfect code. His perfect family was now, in the eyes of people who mattered, flawed. He hated himself for thinking it, hated himself for caring what others thought. But the truth was ugly and persistent. In his world, in his circles, perfection wasn't just desired. It was expected, required, demanded. They got the implants. They hired the specialists. They enrolled Ethan in early intervention programs that cost $4,000 a month. They did everything right, everything by the book, everything the experts recommended. And Ethan made progress. Slow progress, but progress. He responded to some sounds. He started making vocalizations. The specialists were encouraged. But he never spoke, never formed words, never communicated the way they'd been promised he would. "He's only 4, the speech therapist said during their last. "Children take longer. We need to be patient." But patience was expensive. Not in money, Robert had plenty of that. Patience was expensive in hope, in belief, in the slowly dying dream that everything would eventually be okay. Catherine handled it differently than Robert. She threw herself into advocacy, joining boards for deaf children's organizations, fundraising, networking. She turned Ethan's disability into a project, something she could manage, control, optimize. She spoke at luncheons about awareness and inclusion, and people applauded, and she came home and looked at Ethan like he was homework she couldn't quite complete. Robert watched his wife transform into someone he didn't recognize. He watched his son struggle to exist in a world that demanded he communicate in ways his body couldn't manage. He watched his perfect life reveal itself as a beautiful prison, and he didn't know how to escape. The worst part, the part Robert couldn't say out loud to anyone, was the loneliness. He loved his son. He did, but he didn't know his son. Didn't know what Ethan thought about, what he dreamed about, what he was afraid of or excited by or confused about. They existed in the same space but lived in different worlds, and all the money in Robert's accounts couldn't build a bridge between them. Ethan had started having meltdowns 6 months ago, crying fits that lasted hours, screaming without sound, his small body rigid with frustration. The specialists called it behavioral issues related to communication difficulties. They recommended strategies, therapies, interventions. Nothing worked. The meltdowns got worse, more frequent, more intense. Ethan would point at things, gesture frantically, his face red with effort and frustration, trying to tell them something they couldn't understand. And when they didn't understand, couldn't understand, he would collapse into tears and rage. Catherine's patience evaporated. "We've spent a fortune on him," she said one night after a particularly bad episode. "Every expert in the city, everything they've recommended. Why isn't it working? He's not a project, Catherine. He's our son. I know he's our son." Her voice was ice. "I'm the one here with him every day while you're at the office. I'm the one managing his appointments, his therapies, his entire life. Don't tell me I don't know he's my son." They fought more now. About Ethan. About money. About nothing and everything. The perfect marriage revealing its cracks. The perfect life showing its foundation built on sand. 3 days before the wedding, Ethan had a meltdown worse than any before. They were at Catherine's sister's house for a pre-wedding gathering, Ethan playing in the back garden while adults drank wine and discussed seating arrangements. Robert was inside, half listening to someone's story about a vacation in Tuscany, when he heard Catherine scream. He ran outside. Ethan was on the ground, thrashing, crying, his hands moving frantically in gestures that looked almost like he was trying to communicate something but couldn't quite form the shapes. Catherine stood over him, helpless and furious. "What happened?" Robert demanded. "I don't know. He just started. He was fine and then he just..." Catherine's voice broke. "I don't know what he wants. I don't know what's wrong. I never know what's wrong." They took him home early, put him to bed, sat in their living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city of lights, and they didn't speak. What was there to say? They'd run out of words for this particular pain. The meltdowns continued. The morning of the wedding, during the drive to the venue, while getting ready, Ethan cried and cried and cried, and nobody could make it stop. The pediatrician checked him. No fever, no infection, no physical cause. "Maybe he's just overstimulated," the doctor offered. Big events can be overwhelming for children with sensory processing difficulties. Robert wanted to scream. His son was trying to tell them something. He knew it, could feel it. Ethan wasn't crying because of overstimulation. He was crying because he had something to say, something urgent and important, and nobody could hear him. Nobody was listening in the right language. By the time they arrived at the Grand Magnolia for the wedding reception, Ethan had been crying for 3 hours. Guests stared, whispered. Catherine's jaw was set in that way that meant she was holding on to control by a thread. Robert carried his son through the venue, this beautiful historic building with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, and he felt like the floor was crumbling beneath them. They were surrounded by hundreds of people, and they were completely alone. This was Robert Chandler's perfect life. This was what his money and power and influence had built. A beautiful prison where nobody could hear the person who needed to be heard most. But in the service corridors of that same building, invisible to the guests in their designer clothes, a woman was arriving for her evening shift. A woman who'd learned to speak without words. A woman whose daughter had learned the same language from a book pulled from trash. 2 worlds, existing in the same space, about to collide in a way nobody could have predicted. The invisible woman was about to be seen, and nothing would ever be the same. Shanice had worked at the Grand Magnolia for 3 years. She knew every corner of the historic venue, every crack in the marble, every stain on the ceiling that management kept meaning to fix but never did. She knew which bathrooms the rich guests preferred and which ones they avoided. She knew where staff could grab 5 minutes of rest without being noticed. She knew the rhythm of weddings, the predictable flow from ceremony to cocktail hour to reception to the moment when drunk guests started leaving makeup on towels and breaking champagne flutes. She knew how to be invisible here. Saturday meant big money events, and big money events meant Shanice needed to bring her A game. The Thornton Vanderbilt wedding was the kind of affair that got covered in society pages. 2 prominent Memphis families, old money marrying old money, 300 guests, $100,000 budget. Maybe more. Shanice didn't ask questions. She just made sure everything was perfect behind the scenes, in the places where perfection was her responsibility. The problem was Maya. Ms. Henderson had called that morning, apologetic but firm. "Baby, I got the flu. I can't watch Maya today. I'm sorry. I know it's last minute." Shanice had stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, calculating. Her backup sitter was out of town. Her neighbor worked Saturdays. She couldn't miss this shift, due in 5 days and the electric bill already late. She couldn't afford to lose this job, which meant Maya had to come with her. "Listen to me," Shanice said, kneeling in front of her daughter before they left, hands on her small shoulders. "Today is important, baby. I need you to be invisible. You understand what that means?" Maya nodded, solemn. At 4 years old, she already understood more than she should about staying quiet, staying unseen, not causing problems that her mother couldn't afford. You stay in the break room. You stay quiet. You read your books. You don't go wandering. You don't talk to the guests. You don't let anyone see you unless they absolutely have to. Can you do that for Mommy? "I can do it," Maya promised. They took the bus together, Maya's small hand in Shanice's larger one. Shanice had packed a bag with coloring books, snacks, juice boxes, everything to keep a 4-year-old occupied for 8 hours. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't right. But it was survival, and survival meant doing what you had to do. The Grand Magnolia's service entrance was around back, down a narrow alley that smelled like garbage and old grease from the kitchen. Shanice swiped her badge, led Maya through corridors the guests would never see. Pipes visible in the ceiling, concrete floors, the bones of the beautiful building laid bare. The staff break room was tiny, windowless, furnished with a table, a microwave, and a refrigerator that hummed too loud. Shanice set Maya up in the corner with her coloring books and snacks. "Remember what I said? Be invisible," Maya repeated. "Stay quiet. Don't cause problems. That's my girl." Shanice kissed her forehead, inhaling the sweet smell of her daughter's hair. The Johnson's baby shampoo they'd had to buy. Mommy will check on you every chance I get. You need anything, you text me on that tablet. Okay? The tablet was old, barely functional, but it had Wi-Fi and messaging. Shanice had taught Maya how to use it for emergencies. Okay, Mommy. Shanice changed into her uniform, the plain gray dress and sensible shoes that marked her as staff, as service, as someone who should blend into the background. She pulled her hair back, checked her reflection in the small mirror. Invisible Shanice. Work Shanice. The version of herself that earned the money that kept them alive. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 6 p.m. Shanice spent the hours before making sure everything was ready. She cleaned the bathrooms until they sparkled. She polished mirrors. She emptied trash cans. She checked on Maya every 30 minutes, finding her exactly where she'd left her, coloring quietly, being good, being invisible. You're doing great, baby, Shanice whispered during her 4:30 check-in. Just a few more hours. The guests started arriving at 5:30. Shanice watched from the service corridors as they entered, these people who lived in a different world. The women in gowns that cost more than Shanice made in 6 months. The men in custom suits. The jewelry that could pay off her debt and then some. The easy laughter of people who'd never worried about rent or utilities or where the next meal came from. She didn't resent them. Resentment was a luxury, an emotion that required energy she couldn't spare. She just observed them the way she observed everything, filing away details in case they ever became useful. The ceremony started at 6 o'clock. Shanice was in the back, preparing the ballroom for the reception to follow, setting out champagne glasses, adjusting flowers, making sure every detail was perfect for people who'd never know her name. That's when she heard the crying. First, she thought it was normal wedding sounds. Emotional relatives, happy tears, the predictable sentimentality. But this was different. This was a child, screaming with a desperation that made Shanice's mother instincts kick into overdrive. She peered around the corner. In the front row of the ceremony, a well-dressed couple was struggling with a small boy. The man looked miserable, the woman looked furious, and the child was inconsolable. Guests were turning, whispering, the ceremony continuing, but everyone was distracted. Shanice recognized wealth when she saw it. The couple's clothes alone probably cost more than her car was worth. This was their child having a public meltdown, and they were trapped between parenting and social pressure. She should have looked away, should have gone back to her work, should have stayed invisible. But something about that little boy's crying tugged at her. She knew that kind of crying. That wasn't a tantrum. That was desperation. That was fear. That was a child trying to communicate something nobody was hearing. She forced herself to look away. Not her business. Not her world. Not her problem. She went to check on Maya at 6:30. The break room was empty. Shanice's heart stopped. The coloring books were there, spread across the table. The tablet was there. Maya's juice box, half empty. But Maya herself was gone. No, Shanice whispered. No, no, no. She ran. Through the corridors. Through the kitchen where cooks yelled at her to slow down. Through the service areas. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Maya wandering into the street. Maya hurt. Maya lost. Maya talking to guests and getting Shanice fired. She burst into the ballroom just as the ceremony ended, just as guests were standing, applauding, moving toward cocktail hour. The crowd was thick, impossible to navigate. Shanice pushed through, trying to stay unseen but desperate to find her daughter. Then she saw her. Maya standing in front of that same crying boy from earlier. The boy who hadn't stopped crying, whose parents looked like they were at the end of their rope. And Maya's hands were moving. She was signing. Shanice froze. Time seemed to slow. She watched her 4-year-old daughter do something impossible, something beautiful, something terrifying. She watched Maya speak to this boy in the language they'd learned together from a thrown-away book. She watched the boy respond. She watched her daughter stop being invisible. And in that moment, Shanice Williams knew with absolute certainty that their lives were about to change in ways she couldn't control or predict. The careful invisibility she'd cultivated was shattering. The walls she'd built were crumbling. She wanted to run forward, grab Maya, apologize, and disappear, but her feet wouldn't move, because Maya was doing something nobody else could do. Maya was hearing someone nobody else could hear. Maya was making visible what everyone else had missed. And as the crowd turned, as the millionaire knelt down, as the question was asked, "What is he saying?" Shanice felt her carefully constructed world shift on its axis. This was it. The moment everything changed. The invisible woman was about to be seen, and there was no going back. Stories like this one, about the people society trains us not to see, about the moments when invisibility shatters and truth emerges, these are the stories that remind us why connection matters more than status. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, that voices from the margins have wisdom the center needs to hear, consider subscribing. Not because we're asking, but because stories like Shanice and Maya's need witnesses. They need people who'll pay attention when the world looks away. Maya Williams had never been to a wedding before. She'd never seen a room like this, all crystal and gold. Lights that sparkled like stars had been captured and hung from the ceiling. She'd never seen so many people dressed like princes and princesses, never smelled so many different perfumes all at once. Never heard music played by real instruments instead of coming from a phone speaker. It was beautiful. It was overwhelming. And it was everything her mother had told her to avoid. But Maya had heard the crying. She'd been good all afternoon, just like she'd promised. Stayed in the break room, colored in her books, ate her snacks slowly to make them last. She knew Mommy was working hard, knew they needed the money, knew causing problems would make everything worse. But then she'd heard it. Through the walls, down the corridors, a sound that made her chest hurt. A little boy crying in a way that reminded her of when she'd been lost in the grocery store once, separated from her mother, surrounded by tall strangers who didn't see her. That kind of scared crying. That kind of alone crying. Maya had tried to ignore it. She'd colored harder, pressing her crayons into the paper until they almost broke. She'd sung songs to herself quietly, tried to drown out the sound. But it kept going, on, and nobody seemed to be making it better. Her mommy always said Maya had a tender heart. Too tender for this hard world sometimes. Baby girl. But Maya didn't think having a tender heart was bad. She thought maybe the world needed more tender hearts, more people who heard when someone was hurting. So she'd left the break room. She hadn't meant to go far, just to peek to see if the boy was okay. But the corridors were confusing, all looking the same, and she'd taken a wrong turn, and then another, and suddenly she was in a hallway with carpet instead of concrete, walls painted cream instead of gray. She could hear voices now, lots of them, and music, and that crying louder now, more desperate. Maya knew she should turn back. Knew this was exactly what Mommy had told her not to do. But her feet kept moving forward, following that sound, following that hurt. She peered around a corner into a room so big her whole apartment could fit inside it 3 times. So many people, so much noise. And there, in the middle of it all, a little boy about her size, crying like his heart was breaking, while a pretty lady in a fancy dress tried to calm him down and a man in a suit looked helpless. Nobody was helping. Everyone was just staring, whispering, looking uncomfortable. Maya understood uncomfortable. She'd lived her whole life making herself smaller so other people would be more comfortable. But looking at that boy, She didn't feel like being small. She felt like being big enough to help. She walked into the ballroom. Nobody noticed her at first. She was just another child, and in a room full of people in $1,000 outfits, a little black girl in a too small dress was easy to overlook. She walked through the crowd, weaving between legs and purses and champagne glasses, her eyes fixed on the crying boy. She got close enough to see his face, red and swollen. His mouth open in sobs that seemed to have no sound. That's when Maya noticed something others had missed. His hands. They were moving. Not randomly, not just fidgeting. Moving with purpose, making shapes, trying to form something that looked almost like the signs Mommy had taught her. Maya's breath caught. She'd never met another kid who knew sign language. She'd never met anyone outside her mother who could speak with their hands. She'd thought it was just their special thing, their secret language for late nights and quiet moments. But this boy knew it too, or was trying to know it. His hands were clumsy, frustrated, making shapes that almost made sense but not quite, like he was speaking a language he'd only half learned. He was trying to tell them something, and nobody understood. Maya moved closer. The pretty lady, the boy's mother probably, was too focused on her son to notice. Other people were talking, voices rising over each other. Everyone with opinions, nobody with answers. Maya knelt down in front of the boy, right there on the fancy floor. She waited until he looked at her, his tear-filled eyes confused by this new person in his space. Then she lifted her hands and signed, "Hello, my name is Maya." The effect was immediate and profound. The boy stopped crying. Just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. His eyes went wide, locked on Maya's hands, then her face, then her hands again. His mouth opened but no sound came out. Instead, his hands lifted, shaking, uncertain. He signed back, "Can you hear me?" Maya's heart swelled. She nodded, her hands moving in the signs her mother had taught her. "Yes, I can hear you." Around them, the ballroom was starting to notice. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Maya heard someone say, "What is she doing?" And someone else respond, "Is that sign language?" But she ignored them. Right now, there was only her and this boy and the language nobody else seemed to speak. The boy's hands moved faster now, more desperate. The signs were rough, unpolished, like he'd learned them recently and wasn't practiced. But Maya could understand enough. "Bad thing," he signed. "Saw bad thing. Scared. Told Mommy. Told Daddy. They don't understand. Nobody understands." Maya's small face grew serious. She signed back, "I understand. Tell me, what bad thing?" But before the boy could answer, the crowd parted, and a man knelt down beside them. The boy's father, Maya guessed, by the way he looked at the child with love and confusion mixed together. "What?" The man's voice cracked. "What is he saying?" Maya looked up at him. He was tall, even kneeling. He had kind eyes but tired ones, like he hadn't slept in a long time. She wasn't supposed to talk to the guests. Mommy had been clear about that. But sometimes rules had to bend for something more important. "He's been trying to tell you something?" Maya said, her voice small but clear in the suddenly quiet room. Something real important. But nobody was listening the right way. She turned back to the boy, her hands asking, "Can I tell them?" The boy hesitated. His eyes darted around the room, seeing all the faces staring at him, all the attention he'd been desperately seeking but also fearing. Then he looked back at Maya, this little girl who understood him when nobody else could, and he nodded. His hands began to move again, telling his story in signs, and Maya watched carefully, making sure she understood before she translated. He says, Maya's voice was quiet but steady. He saw something 3 days ago, something that scared him real bad. He's been trying to tell you ever since, but when you can't hear and nobody listens with their eyes." She paused, the weight of what she was translating settling on her small shoulders. "You're just scared and alone and nobody knows why you're crying." The ballroom was silent now except for Maya's voice. Even the music had stopped. Every eye was on this little girl in her worn dress, translating for a millionaire's son. The boy's mother spoke, her voice sharp with something that might have been fear. "What did he see?" Maya's hands moved again, asking the question. The boy's response made her body go still. She looked at him carefully, making sure she understood. He nodded, emphatic, his own small face pale. When Maya looked back at the crowd, she felt suddenly small again. All these rich people, all these powerful adults, all these strangers. And she was about to say something that would change everything. "He says he saw someone get hurt. Real bad. He saw it happen in the garden at a big house with white pillars." Her voice dropped lower. "And the person who did it?" She looked at the sea of faces surrounding them. "He says that person is here, in this room, right now." The ballroom erupted. Voices rose in a cacophony of shock, disbelief, and fear. "That's This is absurd. Someone call security." The carefully maintained veneer of high society shattered in an instant, revealing the chaos underneath. Robert Chandler heard none of it. His entire world had narrowed to his son, this boy he loved but couldn't reach, and the little girl who'd somehow built a bridge between them in seconds. "Wait!" Robert's voice cut through the noise, loud and commanding in a way that made people remember who he was, what power he held. "Everyone, please, just wait." The crowd quieted, but the tension remained thick enough to choke on. Robert looked at Maya, this child who couldn't have been more than 4 years old, who shouldn't have been in this ballroom at all, who was now at the center of something none of them understood. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Maya, sir." Her voice was small again, like she just remembered she wasn't supposed to be here. "Maya, I need you to ask my son, Ethan, I need you to ask him exactly what he saw. Can you do that?" Maya nodded. Her hands moved, graceful despite her age, speaking to Ethan in the language they shared. Ethan watched her signs with intense focus, then his hands began moving in response. Back and forth they went, a silent conversation while 200 people watched in breathless silence. Robert's wife Catherine stood beside him, her face pale. "Robert, this is insane. He's 4 years old. He probably saw something on television or—" "Catherine." Robert's voice was gentle but firm. "Let's just listen." Maya's hands had stopped moving. She was watching Ethan's final signs, her young face troubled. When she turned back to Robert, she looked uncertain, like she wanted to be anywhere but here. "He says," she started, then stopped, looking down. "He says it was 3 days ago, Wednesday. You were at a house for dinner. A big white house with tall pillars and a garden in the back." Robert's blood ran cold. Wednesday, Catherine's sister's house. The pre-wedding gathering. The same day Ethan had started having his worst meltdowns. "He says he was playing in the garden," Maya continued, her eyes flicking between Ethan's signing hands and Robert's face. "Behind the bushes, the tall bushes with pink flowers. He liked it there because it was quiet and nobody bothered him. Azalea bushes, Robert thought. Catherine's sister had massive azalea bushes along the back of her garden. He'd seen Ethan playing there, had been glad his son found a peaceful spot away from the noisy adults. He says he heard voices, angry voices, a man and a lady fighting about something. He peeked through the bushes to see. Maya's voice grew quieter. He saw the man push the lady, real hard. She fell and hit her head on the... Maya's hands moved, asking Ethan to clarify. On the stone bench. The one with the angel on it. Catherine made a sound, something between a gasp and a denial. Robert knew that bench. An antique her sister had paid thousands for. A cherub carved into marble, positioned at the center of the garden like a shrine. The lady wasn't moving after she fell, Maya continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. She was bleeding. Ethan says there was a lot of blood. He wanted to help, but he was scared. He stayed hidden in the bushes. The man was panicking, calling someone on his phone, saying they had an accident, saying they needed help fast. Robert's mind raced. An accident. Wednesday evening. He tried to remember the guest list. Who'd been there? If anyone had seemed injured or upset. But it had been a large gathering, people coming and going, conversations happening in clusters. He'd been half engaged, thinking about work, only there because Catherine insisted. He says other people came. Maya went on, translating as Ethan's hands continued their story. Men in dark clothes. They put the lady on something, covered her up, carried her away real quick. The man who pushed her, he went with them. Ethan says he was crying. This is ridiculous. A voice called from the crowd. Robert turned to see James Vanderbilt, the groom's father, his face red. The boy obviously saw something on a crime show. Kids have active imaginations. We're ruining my daughter's wedding over a child's fantasy. But Robert wasn't listening to James. He was watching his son, watching the way Ethan's hands moved with such purpose, such desperate need to be understood. This wasn't imagination, this was memory, this was trauma. Maya, Robert said carefully, can you ask Ethan if he can describe the man who pushed the woman? Maya's hands moved. Ethan responded, his small face screwed up in concentration. He says the man was tall, had dark hair, was wearing a blue shirt with a white bird on it. Polo shirt, Robert thought. A logo. Half the men there had been wearing polo shirts. He says the man had a shiny watch, real big, gold-colored, and a ring on this finger. Maya held up her right hand, indicating the ring finger. This is enough, Catherine said suddenly, her voice tight. Robert, this has gone too far. The child is clearly confused. We're making a spectacle. Catherine. Robert turned to his wife, and something in his face made her stop. Our son has been trying to tell us something for 3 days. 3 days of crying that we couldn't understand, couldn't help. For the first time, someone is hearing him. I will not silence him now. He turned back to Maya. Is there anything else? Anything that might help us identify the man? Maya asked. Ethan signed. Then something changed in the boy's face. His eyes went wide, darting across the crowd. His hands moved frantically, signs tumbling over each other. He says, Maya's voice was suddenly scared. He says the man is here. He can see him right now. The ballroom went silent. Every person seemed to stop breathing. Where? Robert's voice was barely controlled. Maya, ask him where. Ethan's hand lifted, shaking, pointing across the ballroom toward a cluster of people near the bar. His small finger aimed at someone in that group, but from this distance, with so many bodies, it was impossible to tell exactly who. Robert stood, his height giving him a better vantage point. Everyone in that area, I need you to move. Now, spread out. For a moment, nobody moved. Then slowly, reluctantly, the group began to shift, people stepping apart, creating space. As they moved, one figure became clear. Standing at the edge, champagne glass in hand, wearing a light blue polo shirt with a white bird logo, a gold watch gleaming on his wrist, Daniel Morrison, Catherine's brother-in-law, the groom's uncle, a respected surgeon at Memphis General, and on his right hand, a large gold signet ring. Daniel's face had gone white. His eyes met Robert's across the ballroom, and in that moment, before words were spoken, before accusations were made, Robert saw the truth in the man's expression: guilt, fear, and the dawning realization that a 4-year-old boy had just destroyed his carefully constructed life. Maya asked, Ethan signed. Then something changed in the boy's face. His eyes went wide, darting across the crowd. His hands moved frantically, signs tumbling over each other. He says, Maya's voice was suddenly scared. He says the man is here. He can see him right now. The ballroom went silent. Every person seemed to stop breathing. Where? Robert's voice was barely controlled. Maya, ask him where. Ethan's hand lifted, shaking, pointing across the ballroom toward a cluster of people near the bar. His small finger aimed at someone in that group, but from this distance, with so many bodies, it was impossible to tell exactly who. Robert stood, his height giving him a better vantage point. Everyone in that area, I need you to move now. Spread out. For a moment, nobody moved. Then slowly, reluctantly, the group began to shift, people stepping apart, creating space. As they moved, one figure became clear. Standing at the edge, champagne glass in hand, wearing a light blue polo shirt with a white bird logo, a gold watch gleamed. Brother-in-law, the groom's uncle, a respected surgeon at Memphis General, and on his right hand, a large gold signet ring. Daniel's face had gone white. His eyes met Robert's across the ballroom, and in that moment, before words were spoken, before accusations were made, Robert saw the truth in the man's expression: guilt, fear, and the dawning realization that a 4-year-old boy had just destroyed his carefully constructed life. Daniel Morrison's champagne glass slipped from his fingers. The sound of crystal shattering on marble echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. This is insane, Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. A child's accusation, Robert, you can't seriously. Who was it? Robert's voice was steel. Who was the woman? Daniel's face cycled through emotions: denial, anger, calculation, and finally, something that looked like defeat. His shoulders sagged. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. Amanda Richards. He paused. My surgical nurse. We'd been. He couldn't finish. Catherine's sister pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of horror. Daniel? What is he talking about? What woman? But Daniel wasn't looking at his wife. He was looking at Ethan, this small boy who'd witnessed everything, who'd been trying to tell someone, anyone, and been dismissed as having behavioral issues. It was an accident, Daniel said, the words tumbling out now. We were arguing. She was threatening to tell Susan about us. I pushed her. I didn't mean for her to fall. I didn't mean for her to hit the bench. There was so much blood. Oh my God. Susan Morrison's voice broke. Oh my God. Daniel, what did you do? I called Marcus, Daniel continued, as if once the words started, he couldn't stop them. My brother. He handles things. He has connections. He said he could make it look like she disappeared, like she left town. He brought people. They took her to... He stopped, seeming to realize what he was admitting. She was already gone when they arrived. I swear I checked for a pulse. There was nothing. It was too late. Someone in the crowd had called 911. Robert could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer. The perfect wedding had become a crime scene, and at the center of it all was his son. Finally heard, finally understood. Robert knelt back down beside Ethan and Maya. His son's face was still tear-streaked but calmer now. The desperate crying finally stopped. Robert reached out slowly, giving Ethan time to pull away if he wanted, and pulled his boy into his arms. I'm sorry, Robert whispered into his son's hair. "I'm so sorry we didn't listen. I'm so sorry you had to carry this alone." Ethan's small arms wrapped around his father's neck, holding on tight. Robert looked at Maya, this remarkable little girl who'd done what all his money and resources couldn't do. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for hearing him." Maya nodded, but she looked frightened now, seeming to suddenly realize the magnitude of what had just happened. Is my mommy going to be mad at me? I wasn't supposed to leave the break room." "Your mommy?" Robert started, then stopped. "Where is your mother?" "I'm right here." Robert turned. Standing at the edge of the crowd, still in her gray cleaning uniform, was a woman who looked like an older version of Maya. Her face showed a complicated mix of emotions: pride, fear, love, and something else Robert couldn't quite name. This was the janitor, the cleaning woman Catherine had complained about earlier, the single mother working multiple jobs to survive, the woman who'd taught her daughter to speak in a language that had just solved a crime and saved Robert's son from drowning in unheard trauma. Shanice Williams walked forward, her head held high despite the stares, despite the whispers, despite the fact that she was the only person in this room wearing a uniform instead of designer clothes. She reached Maya and put a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Maya, baby, you were supposed to stay in the break room." "I know, Mommy. I'm sorry. But he was crying and nobody could help him and I know, baby." Shanice's voice softened. "I know." She looked up at Robert, her expression guarded. "Sir, I apologize for my daughter disrupting your event. It won't happen again." Disrupting? Robert stood, and he realized he was crying, tears running down his face in front of all these people, and he didn't care. "Ms. Williams. Shanice Williams. Ms. Williams, your daughter just gave my son his voice back. She solved a crime. He looked at Maya, then back at Shanice. Where did she learn sign language?" Shanice's hand moved instinctively to her daughter's head, protective. "I taught her. Found a book someone threw away at one of my other cleaning jobs. Thought it might be useful someday. We've been practicing together for about 6 months." The simplicity of it struck Robert like a physical blow. A thrown-away book, a mother and daughter practicing together. No expensive specialists, no formal programs, just love and dedication and the belief that communication mattered more than convenience. Everything his money hadn't bought, this woman had found in the trash. The police arrived then, uniformed officers entering the grand ballroom, radios crackling. Daniel Morrison was led away. His wife collapsed in a chair. The wedding guests were corralled for statements. The perfect event dissolved into chaos. But in the middle of it all, Robert Chandler made a decision. Looking at Shanice Williams, at her daughter, at his own son finally calm in his arms, he understood something he'd been too blind to see before. Money couldn't buy connection. Power couldn't buy understanding. Privilege couldn't buy the ability to truly hear someone. But a woman with nothing except determination and love had given her daughter something priceless. The ability to bridge silence, to connect across barriers, to hear what others missed. And in doing so, she changed everything. This moment, when everything changes because someone finally listens in the right language, this is the kind of story that reminds us what really matters. Not wealth or status, but the courage to hear what others can't or won't. If stories like these resonate with you, if you believe in amplifying voices that speak different languages, that come from unexpected places, consider joining this community. Hit that subscribe button not because we're asking, but because stories about real connection, about breaking through barriers, about people like Shanice and Maya who change lives from the margins, these stories need witnesses. They need people who'll listen, really listen, even when the language is different from what they expect. Where are you watching from? Has someone in your life ever heard you when nobody else could? Share your location and your story in the comments. Let's build a community of people who believe in listening with more than just our ears. Robert Chandler couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his bed, the same bed he'd slept in for 7 years, in the same penthouse with the same expensive sheets and the same view of Memphis stretching out below like a carpet of lights, and nothing felt the same. Everything had changed. The police had taken statements from everyone at the wedding. Daniel Morrison had been arrested, charged with manslaughter and conspiracy to conceal a death. His brother Marcus, the one who'd handled things, was being sought for questioning. Amanda Richards' body hours, exactly where Daniel said it would be. A hastily concealed crime that was never meant to stay hidden forever. The wedding had been canceled, obviously. The Vanderbilt family was in crisis. The Morrison family was destroyed. Social media was already exploding with the story. Millionaire surgeon, secret affair, accidental death, covered up, exposed by a 4-year-old deaf boy and a janitor's daughter. It was the kind of scandal that would dominate Memphis society for months. But Robert wasn't thinking about the scandal. He was thinking about his son. Ethan was finally sleeping peacefully, for the first time in 3 days. After the police had finished their initial questions, after the ballroom had cleared, after Catherine had retreated to the guest room in icy silence, Robert had sat with Ethan in his room, just sat there, watching his son breathe, watching the tension finally leave his small body. His son had witnessed a death, had carried that trauma alone for 3 days, had tried desperately to communicate it, and been treated like he was misbehaving, been seen as a problem to be managed instead of a person to be heard. How many other times had that happened? How many other things had Ethan tried to tell them that they'd missed? How many moments of connection had Robert lost because he didn't speak his son's language? The thought made his chest ache with a grief he couldn't name. At 2:47 a.m., Robert gave up on sleep. He went to his office, opened his laptop, and did what he always did when he needed to understand something. He researched. He started with sign language. How many deaf children were there in Memphis? In Tennessee? How many families were struggling the way his had been? The numbers shocked him. Thousands of deaf and hard-of-hearing children. Thousands of families navigating a world that wasn't built for them. Limited resources, underfunded programs, long waiting lists for services. Then he researched Shanice Williams. It wasn't difficult. Her name was on the venue's employee records, which he had access to as a frequent client of the Grand Magnolia. From there, it was easy enough to find the basics. Single mother. No father listed on Maya's birth certificate. 3 jobs: medical office cleaning, corporate building janitorial services, and event venue staff. No criminal record. No college degree. High school graduate from a struggling Memphis public school. But the numbers told only part of the story. Robert wanted to know more. He called his private investigator at 8 a.m. I need information on someone. Not for anything bad, just I need to understand her situation. Can you do that? Of course, Mr. Chandler. Give me 24 hours. The report arrived the next evening. Robert read it in his office, alone, and with each page, his understanding of the world shifted a little more. Shanice Williams had gotten pregnant at 27. The father, a man named Marcus Jenkins, had disappeared when she was 4 months along. She'd been working as a receptionist at a dental office, making okay money, building a life. Then Maya was born, and the dental office couldn't accommodate the schedule changes she needed, and she'd been let go. She'd cycled through jobs for a year, each one barely covering rent. She'd been evicted twice, spent 3 months in a shelter. Then she'd found cleaning work, jobs that paid cash, that she could do at odd hours, that didn't require expensive childcare during business hours. She'd climbed out of homelessness through sheer determination, built a life from nothing, raised a daughter alone, worked 3 jobs, and somehow, in the midst of survival, she'd found a book in the trash and decided to learn a language she had no practical need for, just because knowledge mattered, just because someday someone might need her to speak it. The report included financials. Shanice made approximately $32,000 a year from all 3 jobs combined. Her rent was $900 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood Robert wouldn't drive through at night. After rent, utilities, food, and basic necessities, she had roughly $70 of discretionary income per month. $70. Robert spent more than that on a single lunch. He sat back in his leather chair, the report in his hands, and felt something crack open inside his chest. Not pity, that would be too simple, too patronizing. What he felt was recognition. Recognition of strength. Recognition of dignity. Recognition of a kind of wealth that had nothing to do with money. Shanice Williams had given his son something Robert, with all his resources, all his connections, all his power, couldn't give him. She'd given Ethan the ability to be heard. She'd given Robert the ability to hear. And she'd done it without asking for anything in return. His wife Catherine had said nothing about that night since it happened. She'd moved through their home like a ghost, silent and cold. Robert knew she was angry, not about what had happened to Ethan, but about the spectacle, the embarrassment, the way their private struggle had become public. She was angry that a janitor's daughter had solved what all their expensive specialists couldn't. Robert understood in that moment reading the report that his marriage was probably over. Not because of this one event, but because it had revealed something fundamental. He and Catherine no longer shared the same values, if they ever had. She valued appearance. He'd started valuing truth. She valued control. He'd started valuing connection. She saw Maya Williams as an embarrassment. He saw her as a miracle. At 11:30 p.m., Robert made another call, this time to his lawyer. I want to set up a meeting, discreet, private, with Shanice Williams. Can you make that happen? Of course. When? As soon as possible. And I want you to draft something for me. Proposal. I'm going to tell you what I have in mind, and you're going to tell me how to make it legal. Robert talked for an hour. His lawyer listened, asked questions, took notes. When Robert finished, there was a long pause. Mr. Chandler, this would be a significant undertaking. Are you sure? Robert thought about his son, finally sleeping peacefully. He thought about Maya, translating with patient grace while adults stood frozen. He thought about Shanice, teaching her daughter a language from a thrown-away book because knowledge mattered, because someday someone might need it. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Robert said, because he'd finally woken up, finally seen past the walls his privilege had built, finally understood that the people society trained him not to see were often the ones with the most to teach, and he was ready to listen. Shanice Williams knew something was wrong when her supervisor at the Grand Magnolia called her into the office. Ms. Williams, have a seat. She sat, her mind racing through possibilities. Was she being fired? Had Maya gotten her in trouble? Were they going to sue her for disrupting the wedding? She couldn't afford a lawyer. She couldn't afford to lose this job. You have a meeting request, her supervisor said, sliding a card across the desk. From Robert Chandler. Shanice stared at the card. Heavy stock, embossed letters, an address in downtown Memphis, one of those office buildings where the lobby probably cost more than her entire apartment complex. He wants to sue me, Shanice said flatly, for what happened at the wedding. I don't think so. Her supervisor's face was kind. He was very polite, said he wanted to discuss something that could benefit you and Maya. He's offering to compensate you for your time, $200 just for the meeting, even if you decide you're not interested in whatever he's proposing. $200. That was more than Shanice made in a full day working all 3 jobs. When? Tomorrow if you're available. 2 p.m. I'll approve your time off. Shanice went home that night and told Maya about the meeting. Her daughter looked up from her homework, concerned. Are we in trouble, Mommy? I don't know, baby, but we're going to find out. The next day, Shanice put on her best outfit, a dress she'd bought secondhand 3 years ago for a job interview. She dropped Maya at Miss Henderson's, took 2 buses downtown, and walked into a building where even the security guard looked like he earned more than she did. Robert Chandler's office was on the 32nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view that stretched forever, furniture that looked like art. Everything whispered wealth and power and a world Shanice didn't belong to. Robert stood when she entered, extending his hand. Ms. Williams, thank you for coming. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. His eyes were tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. He looked different than he had at the wedding, less polished somehow, more human. Mr. Chandler. Shanice's voice was steady, even though her heart was racing. I'm here. What is this about? Please sit. He gestured to a chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? I'm fine. Thank you. Robert sat across from her, not behind his desk but in the chair next to hers, closing some of the distance his wealth had created. I want to start by thanking you. And Maya, what she did for my son. I can't. There aren't words adequate to express what that meant. Shanice waited. There was more coming. There was always more. I've been thinking about that night, Robert continued, about how Maya learned sign language, about the book you found, about how you taught her something that had no immediate practical application for your life, just because it might matter someday. Knowledge is important, Shanice said simply. That's what my grandmother taught me. Your grandmother was right. Robert leaned forward. Ms. Williams, Shanice, may I call you Shanice? She nodded, wary. Shanice, I've spent the last 3 days researching deaf education in Memphis. The resources are inadequate. The programs are underfunded. There are thousands of families struggling the way mine was, trying to communicate with their children, trying to help them thrive in a world that isn't built for them. And most of those families don't have my resources. Shanice still didn't speak. She'd learned long ago to let wealthy people talk, to wait for the actual ask, because there was always an ask. I want to start a school, Robert said, a specialized school for deaf and hard-of-hearing children. Free tuition, full services, speech therapy, sign language instruction, academic support, everything families need. I want to fund it entirely, make it available to any family regardless of income. It was a beautiful vision. Shanice could see it, almost taste it, a place where children like Ethan could thrive, where parents could learn to communicate with their own kids. But she still didn't understand why she was here. That's wonderful, Mr. Chandler. But what does that have to do with me? Robert smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. I want you to run it. The words didn't make sense. Shanice heard them, but they didn't connect to anything in her reality. I'm sorry, what? I want you to be the founder and director of the school. I'll provide the funding, the building, the resources, but I want you to lead it. You and Maya, you understand what these families need in a way I never could. You've lived it. You've learned the language. You've bridged the gap. Shanice stood up, her mind reeling. Mr. Chandler, I clean offices. I don't have a degree. I don't have credentials. I'm not qualified to run a school. You found a book in the trash and learned a language. You taught your 4-year-old daughter that same language. That daughter used it to solve a crime and help my son when every expert I'd hired failed. I'd say you're more qualified than anyone I could hire. This is crazy. Shanice paced to the window, looking out at Memphis spread below. People like me don't get opportunities like this. There has to be a catch. What do you really want? Robert stood, walking to stand beside her at the window, but maintaining a respectful distance. I want to do something that matters. I want my son to grow up in a world where more people speak his language. I want families like mine to have better resources than we did. And I want to partner with someone who understands that communication is about more than words. That connection requires effort and humility and the willingness to learn a different language. He turned to face her fully. I'm not offering you charity, Shanice. I'm offering you a partnership. You bring the understanding, the lived experience, the knowledge of what these families actually need. I bring the resources to make it happen. Together, we build something that changes lives. 1 year later, the building stood on the corner of Madison and Evergreen, 3 stories of renovated brick that had once been a failing elementary school. Robert Chandler had purchased it for $800,000, then spent another $2 million renovating it specifically for deaf and hard-of-hearing children. The classrooms were designed with special acoustics. The lighting was optimized for visual communication. Every hallway had visual alert systems. Every classroom had both spoken and signed instruction capabilities. The technology was cutting-edge, the resources comprehensive. But the real transformation wasn't the building. Shanice Williams stood at the front entrance, watching families arrive for the grand opening. A year ago, she'd been cleaning this same building when it was still for sale, empty and neglected. A year ago, she'd been working 3 jobs, barely surviving, teaching her daughter sign language from a thrown-away book. Now she was wearing a professional dress that actually fit, standing in front of a building with a sign that read, "The Ethan and Maya School for Deaf Children, founded by Shanice Williams, funded by the Chandler Foundation." Her name, on a building, founding a school. Sometimes she still couldn't believe it was real. The year hadn't been easy. Shanice had spent 6 months in intensive training, working with deaf education experts, getting certified, learning everything she needed to know to run a specialized school. She'd hired a staff of 15. Teachers, therapists, counselors, all carefully selected for their expertise and their compassion. She'd also gone back to school herself, enrolled in a degree program for deaf education. Robert had offered to pay for it, but Shanice had refused. "I'll take the loans," she'd said. "Some things I need to earn myself." Maya was now 5, enrolled in the school's kindergarten program. She'd become something of a celebrity among the students. This hearing child who signed fluently, who moved between both worlds with easy grace. She'd made a dozen friends, children who communicated in the same language she'd learned from a book in the trash. And Ethan was thriving. Robert had enrolled him immediately, of course. But more than that, Robert himself had learned sign language, spent hours every evening practicing, studying, determined to communicate with his son in Ethan's native language. Catherine had not. Catherine had filed for divorce 3 months after the wedding incident, unable or unwilling to adjust to a life that centered on their son's needs rather than social appearances. Robert had let her go without a fight. Now he arrived at the grand opening with Ethan by his side, both of them signing to each other as they walked. Shanice watched them approach, father and son finally connected, finally able to share thoughts and feelings and all the small moments that make up a relationship. "The building looks incredible," Robert said, switching to spoken English when he reached Shanice, though his hands continued signing for Ethan's benefit. "You've done something amazing here." "We've done something amazing," Shanice corrected. "This doesn't happen without you." "And it doesn't happen without you," Robert replied. The building is just bricks and technology. You made it a place where children can truly be themselves. Ethan tugged on Shanice's sleeve. His hands moved in the fluid, confident signs of a child who'd finally found his voice. Thank you for teaching Maya to hear me. Shanice knelt down, signing back. Thank you for being brave enough to keep trying to tell your story. You helped a lot of people by not giving up. More families were arriving now. Parents who'd been on waiting lists for services they couldn't afford. Children who'd struggled in mainstream schools that weren't equipped to support them. Families who'd been told their children would never thrive, would never succeed, would always be limited by their disability. They came through the doors of the Ethan and Maya school, and they found something different. Not a place that tried to make deaf children more like hearing children, but a place that celebrated deaf culture, that taught in ASL as a first language, that built confidence instead of trying to fix something that wasn't broken. Shanice stepped to a microphone as the crowd gathered in the main assembly hall. The room was packed, over 200 people, media cameras in the back, local politicians who wanted to be associated with this feel-good story. Thank you all for coming. Her voice steady now with a confidence she'd built over months of practice. An interpreter signed beside her, making her words accessible to everyone. A year ago, I was cleaning buildings for a living. I was invisible to most of the world, just another service worker people looked past. My daughter and I were surviving, but barely, always one emergency away from losing everything. She paused, her eyes finding Maya in the crowd, then Ethan, then Robert. Then my daughter did something I taught her, something we'd learned together from a book someone else had thrown away. She used sign language to help a little boy who was drowning in silence, who had something important to say but no one who could hear him. And that moment changed everything. Shanice felt her voice thicken with emotion but push through. This school exists because a 4-year-old girl believed communication mattered, because a millionaire father chose humility over ego and partnership over charity, because a little boy was brave enough to keep trying to tell his story even when no one understood. She looked around the room, at all these families who'd come seeking hope, but mostly, this school exists to prove something simple, that everyone has a voice, everyone has something important to say, and our job, all of us, is to learn how to listen, even when the language is different from what we expect. The room erupted in applause, both clapped and signed, hands waving in the deaf community's visual applause. Shanice felt tears on her cheeks but didn't wipe them away. These were good tears, earned tears, tears of triumph and transformation and the almost unbearable beauty of seeing something impossible become real. After the ceremony, after the tours and the speeches and the photos, after most of the crowd had dispersed, Shanice found herself in the school library with Robert, Maya, and Ethan. The children were looking at books together, their hands moving in comfortable conversation. "Can I tell you something?" Robert said quietly. "Of course. That night at the wedding, I was drowning. My marriage was failing. My son was suffering. I had all the money in the world, and none of it could fix what was actually wrong." He watched Ethan and Maya, heads together over a picture book. "You didn't just help my son. You saved my life, gave it purpose, meaning, made me understand that wealth is measured in connection, not currency." Shanice smiled. "You gave my life purpose too. Gave me a chance to turn pain into something beautiful, to take a throwaway book and build a school, to prove that knowledge matters no matter where you find it or who you are when you find it." They stood together in silence, watching their children who'd somehow managed to change both their worlds. "You know what the best part is?" Shanice said finally. "In this school, nobody is invisible. Every child is seen. Every voice is heard. Every language matters." "That's not just the best part of the school," Robert replied. "That's the best part of what we've all learned. That seeing people, really seeing them, really hearing them, that's where everything good begins." Stories of transformation, of people rising from invisibility to purpose, of connections that bridge impossible gaps. These are the stories that remind us what's possible when we choose to see each other clearly, when we choose to listen in whatever language is needed. If you believe in the power of these stories, if you felt something shift inside you watching Shanice and Robert and Maya and Ethan build something beautiful from brokenness, then become part of this community. Subscribe not because we're asking for numbers, but because you understand that real change begins with paying attention, with amplifying voices that come from unexpected places, with celebrating people who turn trash into treasure and silence into song. 5 years later, the Ethan and Maya School had expanded twice, now serving over 300 students from across Tennessee. Shanice had completed her master's degree in deaf education. Robert had opened 2 more schools in Nashville and Knoxville, each one following the same model: free tuition, comprehensive services, led by people who understood the community they served. Maya was 9 years old, fluent in 3 languages: English, ASL, and Spanish, which she'd learned because half her classmates at the school were Latino. She'd become a junior ambassador for the school, traveling with her mother to conferences, showing other children that being bilingual in spoken and sign languages was a gift, not a limitation. Ethan was 9 too, thriving academically and socially. He and Maya were best friends. Their bond forged in that moment 5 years ago when she'd knelt beside him and given him the gift of being heard. Robert had full custody, his relationship with his son deep and genuine, built on genuine communication and mutual respect. The school had become nationally recognized. Other cities were replicating the model. Deaf education advocates held it up as an example of what was possible when resources met understanding, when wealth met wisdom, when privilege chose partnership over patronage. But the real measure of success wasn't in awards or recognition or newspaper articles. It was in moments like this one. A quiet Tuesday afternoon, Shanice in her office doing paperwork, when a mother knocked on her door. "Ms. Williams, do you have a minute?" "Of course, come in." The woman sat down, tears already forming. I needed to thank you. My daughter started here 6 months ago. She'd been failing in her regular school, struggling so hard, and we thought maybe she just wasn't smart enough. But here she's thriving. She's happy. She's learning. And it's because someone finally bothered to teach her in her language instead of trying to force her to learn in someone else's. Shanice reached across the desk, taking the woman's hand. "Your daughter was always smart enough. She just needed people who were smart enough to meet her where she was." After the mother left, Shanice sat alone in her office, looking at the framed photo on her desk. It was from that night 5 years ago, the wedding that changed everything. Someone had captured the moment. Maya kneeling in front of Ethan, their hands signing, 2 4-year-olds speaking in silence while the world watched. Beneath the photo, Shanice had placed the book. The original copy, stained and bent, that she'd pulled from the trash 5.5 years ago. American Sign Language, A Beginner's Guide. The book that had changed her life. The book that had saved a little boy. The book that had built a school. The book that proved, once and for all, that what society throws away often contains exactly what someone else desperately needs. Shanice touched the worn cover gently, remembering the woman she'd been when she found it. Tired, struggling, invisible. A woman just trying to survive, working 3 jobs, raising a daughter alone, believing that her life would always be small. That woman couldn't have imagined this office, this school, this life of purpose and meaning and impact. But that woman had also done something crucial. She'd believed knowledge mattered even when she couldn't see how it would ever be useful. She'd taught her daughter a language they had no practical need for. She'd invested time and energy into learning something just because it might someday matter. And that choice, that small choice to pick up a thrown-away book and decide it was worth learning from, had changed everything. Not just for her, not just for Maya, but for Ethan, for Robert, for 300 students and their families, for every child who would walk through these doors in the years to come. One book, one choice, one moment of believing that nothing is truly trash if someone sees its value. That's how revolutions start. Not with grand gestures or massive movements, but with small acts of faith. With people choosing to see value where others see waste. With people choosing to learn languages others ignore. With people choosing to hear voices others have silenced. Shanice's phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Mom, Ethan and I are doing our presentation on deaf culture to the 4th graders. Can you come watch? Shanice smiled, texted back, On my way, baby. She stood, straightened her professional blazer, touched the book one more time like a talisman, and walked out of her office into the hallway filled with children's laughter and hands moving in beautiful, silent conversation. A year ago, 5 years ago, a lifetime ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Seen, heard, making a difference. And it all started with a book in the trash and a little girl who learned to listen with her eyes. This is what's possible when we refuse to accept that anyone is disposable, that any knowledge is worthless, that any voice doesn't matter. Shanice's story, from invisible janitor to school founder, from survival to purpose, from silence to celebration, this is the kind of story that proves transformation is always possible. That seeing people clearly changes everything. That choosing to learn languages others ignore opens doors nobody knew existed. If the story moved you, if you felt something shift in your understanding of what's possible, if you believe in amplifying voices that come from margins and celebrating people who turn trash into treasure, then join this community. Subscribe because you understand that these stories need to be told, need to be shared, need to ripple out into a world that too often makes people invisible. Where are you watching from right now? Has someone in your life ever seen value in you when others looked past? Have you ever learned something that seemed useless until suddenly it was the most important thing? Share your location and your story in the comments below. Let's build a community of people who believe in seeing each other clearly, in learning each other's languages, in recognizing that what looks like trash to one person might be treasure to another. Because that's how we change the world. Not with grand gestures, but with small acts of attention. Small choices to see. Small decisions to learn. Small moments of believing that everyone has something important to say. And our job is simply to learn how to listen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing this story. Thank you for being the kind of person who believes connection matters more than status, that communication requires effort, that the people society makes invisible are often the ones with the clearest vision. Subscribe, share, and comment. Be part of a community that chooses to see. Because Shanice and Maya and Ethan and Robert, they're not just characters in a story. They're reminders of what's possible when we choose to hear each other. Really hear each other. In whatever language is needed. That's the revolution. That's the transformation. That's how we build a world where nobody has to cry alone because nobody speaks their language. We learn, we listen, we see, and everything changes.